The anxious generation. Discover mode and the need for risky play. 1. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how overprotective parenting is affecting kids today.
Really? I thought being protective was a good thing, especially with all the dangers out there.
It seems counterintuitive, but studies show that too much supervision can actually increase anxiety in children.
That's surprising. What do you mean by that?
When kids aren't allowed to explore their environment, they miss out on learning how to handle risks. They end up in defend mode instead of discover mode.
What's the difference between those modes?
In discover mode, children build confidence and learn to manage challenges. In defend mode, they become more anxious and less secure in their abilities.
I see. But what about the dangers of the internet? Isn't that a real concern?
Absolutely. A 2019 New York Times article highlighted a record 45 million illegal images of child abuse flagged online, showing how predators exploit the internet.
That's alarming. So, are we focusing on the wrong threats?
Exactly. A young girl wrote about how she stumbled upon explicit content online despite her mother being overly protective in the real world.
That's a stark contrast. So, what should we be doing instead?
The key is to allow children more unsupervised outdoor play. It teaches them to navigate risks and builds their resilience.
That makes sense. It sounds like a balance is necessary for healthy development.
Discover mode versus defend mode. Have you ever thought about how our ancestors dealt with anxiety?
Not really, but I know anxiety is a big issue for kids today.
Absolutely. They had to adapt to environments that were constantly changing, with periods of safety and danger.
That makes sense. So, how did they cope with that variability?
They developed two systems: the Behavioral Activation System, or BAS, which I like to call Discover Mode.
Discover mode sounds positive. What does it do?
It kicks in when opportunities arise, like finding food. It floods you with positive emotions.
And the opposite of that is defend mode, right?
Exactly. The Behavioral Inhibition System, or BIS, activates when threats are detected, like a predator nearby.
So, defend mode is all about survival?
Yes, and for those with chronic anxiety, defend mode can be activated all the time, which isn't ideal.
That's really interesting. How does this relate to kids today?
Well, children in safe environments often get stuck in defend mode, seeing new experiences as threats rather than opportunities.
So, how does that affect their personalities?
Those in discover mode tend to be happier and more social, while those in defend mode can be anxious and defensive.
That's a fascinating perspective on anxiety and behavior.
It really highlights the importance of understanding these modes for our kids' development. Kids are antifragile. Did you know that in the late 1980s, there was a grand experiment in the Arizona desert called Biosphere 2?
No, I haven't heard of it. What was it about?
It was the largest attempt to create a closed artificial ecosystem meant to support 8 people living there for years.
That sounds fascinating. Did it succeed?
Not really. They learned that the complexity of biological and social interactions was too great. Many trees grew quickly but fell over before maturity.
That's surprising. Why did that happen?
They didn't realize young trees need wind to grow strong. Wind helps them develop a stronger root system and wood structure.
So, it's like children needing challenges to grow strong too?
Exactly. This concept is called antifragility. It means some things actually benefit from stress and challenges.
That makes sense. How does this relate to children?
Children need to experience frustrations and minor conflicts to develop their psychological immune systems, just like trees need wind.
Interesting. So, protecting them too much might not be helpful?
Yes, Overprotecting can hinder their ability to handle life's challenges, similar to how trees in a greenhouse may fall over from their own weight. Antifragile kids need risky play to stay in discovery mode. Have you ever noticed how kids seem to love taking risks when they play?
Absolutely. It seems like they always want to push their limits.
Exactly. Researchers have found that this behavior actually helps them develop resilience.
That's fascinating. But why do they seek out these risky situations?
It turns out that thrilling experiences can have antiphobic effects, as noted by Sandcedar and Kinnear in their 2010 study.
So, by facing fears, they become less anxious over time?
Exactly. Kids who fall out of trees often grow up to be less afraid of climbing trees later on.
That makes sense. It's like they learn to distinguish between what's truly dangerous and what's not.
Right. As they gain mastery, their fear tends to recede, turning into thrill and triumph instead.
I can see that in my child. They get excited after overcoming something that once scared them.
It's a beautiful process. Just like how pets, like dogs, learn to navigate their fears in social settings.
Oh, I can relate. My little one is always curious, but sometimes nervous around other kids.
That's normal. They often experiment with joy and fear, just like how a puppy learns to play with bigger dogs. Kids are natural thrill seekers. They need to take risks to overcome fears and wire their brains for exploration.
I always thought it was just about having fun. How does that help them?
Engaging in risky play helps them develop competencies like judging risks and taking appropriate actions when faced with danger.
That makes sense. I read that researchers Sandcedar and Kinnear defined risky play as thrilling activities that involve a risk of injury.
Exactly. Their 2023 paper highlights that such play usually happens outdoors and during free play, not structured activities.
What kinds of risks do kids seek out when given the freedom to explore?
They look for heights, high speeds, using dangerous tools, experimenting with fire, rough play, and even disappearing for a bit.
Wow, I didn't realize there were so many types of risks. Why is it important for them to experience this?
It teaches them how to manage their bodies in the physical world, which is crucial before they spend too much time in a virtual one.
That's fascinating. I've seen playgrounds designed to be safer, but are we losing the thrill?
Yes, playgrounds today often lack the risk that was present in older designs. Minor injuries can actually be beneficial for learning. In the US, there's a growing concern about liability, which has led to safer playground designs since the 1990s.
That makes sense, but does that really help kids in the long run?
Actually, research shows that kids need some risk in their play to develop essential skills and overcome anxiety.
What kind of research are we talking about?
Mariana Bressoni, a play researcher, found that the risk of injury during unstructured play is lower than in adult-guided sports.
That's surprising. So, what's the main takeaway from these findings?
The key is to keep children as safe as necessary, not as safe as possible, to foster their growth.
Interesting. I guess it's about finding a balance, then?
Exactly. Children need to learn to calibrate their own risk levels, just like they would in real-life situations.